Dear colleagues, on behalf of the World Organization of United Cities and Local Governments, Metropolis and UN Habitat, we welcome you to this follow-up session of our Cities Are Listening experience. As you know, Cities Are Listening arises from the premise that our cities and territories will never be the same, and from this statement we seek to rethink and reshape our territories in a structural dialogue with both our membership and civil society. I will now yield the floor to our chair, the Secretary General Emilia Saiz, and as you know we have two panels. One, it's a structural discussion, and the second one is to start thinking on the way forward. Emilia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pablo. We are I see Octavi already here, my co-chair as well. We hadn't seen you, Octavi. Welcome to this meeting, which is a kind of a by invitation only closed-door meeting where we want to actually evaluate some of the agreements that we reached in the previous session and propose a follow-up. We have, since we last met and where we saw a very diverse group of stakeholders that had been following discussions already from our Congress in Durban on the town halls. We saw a very important commitment of that stakeholder group, and we made concrete proposals about how to consolidate this space as a space for co-creation, and to go from the mere exchange of practices, which remains extremely important, and my membership and probably your partners also need that, to a more strategic kind of thinking, of gathering. That's what Cities Are Listening mean. It's the town hall process that we opened up. We know that local and regional governments would like a bigger space, a bigger role at the decision-making table, but that space at the decision-making table is a space that only makes sense if it is to actually be able to voice the needs of communities better, to make sure that sphere of government that is closest to communities can actually impact global policy. And in order to do that, our recommendations to the international community and our capacity to lead in the transformative discussions will need to be built with inputs from the communities themselves. And since we are working at global level, we think that the stakeholders that are gathered in this group are very critical, from human rights to peace builders to other groups that are here, from civil society practitioners and beyond. So that is what we're trying to do with Cities Are Listening. The second thing is, well, convincing my membership. And Octavi's membership. It's not a given that local and regional governments want to build their international agenda in such a close, intimate co-creation with civil society. Happily, we had undertaken a very important step with the town halls in Durban. So we had a political mandate to follow up on that. And now what we are doing is to push them a little further. And what we are proposing to them is that Cities Are Listening becomes like the core group that will shape one of the three pacts that we are pushing for in the UCLG strategy. The Pact for People. We have three pacts that we feel need to guide our work as municipal international movement. The presidency is starting to play with these thoughts, and we wanted to give them very strong names that everybody would identify with. So one is people, planet, and government. Those are the three pacts that we will need to look into. And we think cities are listening is extremely critical to shape that first one. Now, in practical terms, it will mean us starting a discussion, a content discussion, and this is the first part of this session. We will see many of those discussions going on. Secondly, we also want to maintain this exchange of experiences between cities and stakeholders, thematic experiences. And we will present you a calendar of the next set of possible live learning experiences around some topics that we have already seen, but also new topics. How will tourism look in the future? This is extremely important for many of our cities because it's the bread and butter of their societies. Of course, we are not going to forget things like housing. We cannot forget public space, etc. But we need to develop a new generation of life learning experiences. We also want to explore with you, how do we campaign together? Most of you proposed joint campaigning as a very important advocacy tool for the future. And I am seeing some of the important results that we can achieve, for instance, with our universal health coverage campaigns that we are developing together, with public transport campaigns, etc. Well, we will look into that. Today, we are going to focus on the first two aspects. So content discussions on, okay, what are we missing and how can we start to co-create this pact for people, this renewed pact for people. And the justification to do that here is because we truly think that if we want a renewed multilateral system, it will need to be built with these ideas. And it gives us the legitimacy to have this conversation. And we don't need to wait for another space to be granted to us. So I will start with that. And the second part of the day will be facilitated by the Secretary General of Metropolis. And we will see some concrete actions and proposals from partners that are joining this table for co-creation, and that can impact the things that we do together. So I am going to propose to start with a conversation where Basu and Maria Fernanda will kick off. You all know them, of course. Basu as director of Accord, and Maria Fernanda, a former president of the UN General Assembly. But I think, Maria Fernanda, we need to find new titles for you. It's just that you have so many. I didn't know which one to pick. So I am going to kick off with a couple of questions, and then let us see where this conversation leads us. But Basu, first, before I start with these questions, I know that you had a video that you wanted to show to us. When do you want to show it? You want to start now with that video?
Yeah, I think it will help. It's just something I came across last night from a website called Visual Capitalist, and I would recommend it to everybody because they do extremely good graphics. So maybe we can put that now.
Indeed, it's just to trigger. I have seen it. I think indeed it's very interesting. It's just to trigger the discussion, because the place of departure, and Octavi, please feel free to add in questions or to jump into the conversation, any colleague, as a matter of fact. The start of our conversation is this Citopia that you brought to us, Basu, which you say we need to fight a lot of false discourse. We need to conceive a new narrative for that future urban era. That's where I would like to start, and I think the video is a very interesting place to be. It's a brief video of around 2 minutes, so I don't know, colleagues, who will do the video thing, but we can go. Is it ready? Internet is slow these days, but it's coming. No? Yeah. We don't have sound. I don't know if that is normal.
You have to switch the sound on the video.
5 million. Today, the largest urban areas are spread somewhat evenly throughout the globe. Nearly every continent can claim at least one of the world's 20 most populous cities. According to projections from the Global Cities Institute, this top 20 list may shift dramatically by the end of the century. By 2025, Moscow and Istanbul exit the top 20, leaving the European region of the map blank. Midway through the century, a number of cities in South Asia experience a population boom, and Mumbai supplants Tokyo as the largest city in the world. By 2075, African cities begin their rapid ascension, leaving only New York and Mexico City representing the Americas in the top 20 list. Notice China is left off completely. At the close of this century, over a dozen cities in Africa, such as Lilongwe and Khartoum, expand to more than twice the size of present-day Tokyo. Let's take a closer look at the 3 cities projected to be the largest in 2100. Dar es Salaam, a city on the coast of Tanzania, has a population of 4.4 million today, but by 2100, its population is projected to surpass 70 million. Kinshasa, the capital of the DRC, may be the second largest city in the world, with a population of 83 million. Nigeria's largest city, Lagos, is expected to push the limits of how big a metropolis can get. Already, Lagos has seen explosive
We have some difficulties with internet, but would you mind, Basu, to just go with these ideas that we have seen from this part of the video?
Yeah, I think that was just the most relevant part, stopping at Lagos. So do you want me to go in on from here?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so, you know, I have to say, Emilia, that this has been such an interesting exercise, because once I talked about Citopia, and really for our colleagues, it was to distinguish between our aspirations for a utopia, which is almost always impossible that we will get to a utopia, but the fact that there are factors in the world today that point that we could move towards a dystopian future, particularly because cities will have just so many millions of people, and you've seen the numbers, and that's why I put that up, because the numbers were relevant. And you know, when I started now, I thought, let me do justice to the presentation you asked me to do, so I should actually go and research some of this to find out. And I have to tell you, it was just a most interesting exercise, because if you now recall everybody, we moved from you know, the centuries ago, we moved from city-states to nation-states. And what we are seeing now is a move back from nation-states to city-states with the growth of these large megacities that we are seeing in the world. And when I then went in to look at research, what I found was that futurists who were writing in the 1930s around, you know, the period of advanced industrialization, they were basically looking at a number of ideas and a number of inventions at that time and writing about what the future will look like. And even people like George Orwell and others who wrote 1984, you know, looking at what the future would look like, either a utopian future or a dystopian future. And at the time, there was huge change in the world that was taking place. And that was populations were expanding. They were also starting to urbanize, mainly in the Western world. And at the same time, there were huge new technologies that were coming into being. If you remember the period of the 1930s. And there was a kind of revolution going on in Europe and in North America, technological revolution. And then, you know, people were beginning to think about what the future would look like. And whether, importantly, whether this technology would actually help humanity, or whether they would lead to horrendous futures that we have as humanity. And so they started writing about all of these futures. So I want to quickly just move to say, what were they looking at as characteristics of a dystopian future. And the point here, and this is why the importance of what we are doing today, is that choices we make now will lead either to a better future or to a dystopian future. And that's why it's so important, that we begin to look at this. So what were the characteristics? And as I'm going through them, if you just think today, what we have in the world, you'll recognize that a lot of what they were talking about then as what a dystopian future and the characteristics of it actually are present in our world, dangerously so, at this specific point in time. And COVID-19 has exposed it somehow. And in fact, now we see it has also exacerbated it. So the first characteristic of a dystopian future is a world dominated by a global environmental fascism, where the government ultimately promotes the extinction of the human race by enforced mass suicide so as to save the environment. Okay, that's a little bit extreme. We don't think that we will get there, but okay, that's just to give you your taste buds a little. But secondly, societies are either very unequal or society is ruthlessly egalitarian, in which ability and accomplishment or even competence are suppressed or stigmatized as forms of inequality. Thirdly, there is an enormous wealth gap between the rich and poor, which we have today, and the military and police are used to control the starving masses. This is not far-fetched. This is something that could happen in the future. The dystopia represses the intellectuals with particular force. As we know today, there's a lot about, let's forget about evidence-based, etc. Let's listen to fake news. And dystopian governments do not usually care for the well-being or safety of their citizens. They focus on complete control and extortion of their people. This is all in order to maintain power. Then the governing class is hedonistic and shallow, which George Orwell considered plausible. Dystopia are often filled with pessimistic views of the ruling class or government that is brutal or uncaring, ruling with an iron or iron fist. These dystopian governments, establishments often have protagonists or groups that lead to a resistance to enact change within their government. Now, last night I was watching Al Jazeera, and I looked at the issues in Lagos City. And Lagos represented exactly what is being described here today, that was written years about. And so if you look at just the disturbances in Lagos and how it played out, and then totalitarian societies utilize total control over and demands total commitment from their citizens, usually hiding behind a political ideology. Now, then if we say, where do we go as a Zootopia and what should be some of the characteristics? So to conclude, maybe we have to recognize first, if we're talking about Zootopias of the future, we have to recognize firstly that people are urbanizing rapidly. By 2100, almost 80% will live in cities. Secondly, most people will live, work, travel, and network in cities. City governments will be the epicenter of governance and service delivery. City governments will also be responsible for the safety and security of its citizens more than national governments. And then localization will live alongside and complement globalization. And then technology will network cities into a global community. Therefore, creating Zootopias of the future means creating cities based on new values that drive our personal, communal, and global interactions, values of cooperation, nonviolence, etc. Then by creating equitable societies within and between cities across the world. Then thirdly, by building an ecosystem of globally sustainable cities that contribute to the protection of the global commons, the high seas, our atmosphere, the Antarctica, and outer space, and I would add today, cyberspace. By creating a global data bank of knowledge where cities across the world share knowledge for human progress. And then what we in Global Peace refer to developing an ecosystem for development by linking influencers, innovators, investors, and implementers together. And lastly, creating a Zootopian ideology based on true egalitarianism, equality, and social democracy coupled with caring capitalism that combines social enterprise with social responsibility that creates social value. So this is what I found in the research, and this is what I thought could stimulate some discussion about where we should be going and why we should be thinking about it now.
Thank you very much, Masu. Very inspiring. My issue with this is that I think many member states, and let us take member states and then some thinkers, see the cities and the urban era as the cause of this dystopia. Instead of seeing them as the opportunity, they see us in this apocalyptic setting in which these mega cities disregard rights, disregards opportunities, and build on those that have not, which is true as well. I mean, right now, the foundation of our societies in general, cities or not cities, I mean, everywhere, is built on inequalities and the possibilities that those inequalities create for some to drive and some, you know, to just follow. So allow me now to get to Maria Fernanda and check with you, Maria Fernanda.
Emilia, so can I interrupt you?
Yes,
for 1
please,
second?
go ahead.
I was just a brief question to Basu on, because he has finished talking about the values, and of course on one hand, when I was seeing the video, I was scared because we hope, you know, in Star Wars there is this planet which is called Ecumenopolis, which is a city planet. I hope we won't get there, because that even. But in any case, we talk a lot about rethinking. In our case, metropolises, but the cities, the urban system, etc. But we are not really thinking in terms of values, and maybe the key issue is values. I think, yes, with UCLG, it was launched and we supported this decalogue for the aftermath. But which will be, according to you, the key values if we want to move from the dystopia to Theotopia?
Let me.
So, so you want to do it later, Emilia?
Yes, allow me to test some of Basu's thoughts with Maria Fernanda, and then we go back to that question and see also what Maria Fernanda can add to this. I was going to the question, Maria Fernanda, whether you identify with this notion that some of the member states of the current greatest multilateral system that we know, which is the United Nations, see the cities as a very disruptive thing. And in fact, many of the member states have been trying to ruralize their country or to keep their countries, you know, surviving from a strong rural perspective. Is that something that you see, or can you identify with the need to evolve towards that Theotopia?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's so good to see you all again, Emilia, Octavi, and to listen to Basu. Very provocative opening of this conversation. And Pablo, well, it's so nice to be with you under this great umbrella of the cities are listening. And the truth is that basically, when I was preparing this exercise, I looked at the questions that you ask. And I think that basically, you know, my thinking was not like a, you know, futuristic exploration, to be very honest, but I went through, you know, to a very pragmatic kind of approach, if you wish. And I started thinking what, you know, how, you know, to make sure that cities and are properly represented and connected to the global agenda, you know, as easy as that. And I think in my experience of almost, I would say, almost 25, 30 years in the international arena, I have learned to understand, you know, the irreplaceable role of local and regional governments in shaping, in boosting and revitalizing the international agenda, and the contribution that as cities and regional governments make to the new, and should make, especially now, to the new global governance arrangements. And I think that that's perhaps, you know, an issue that we need to explore. And basically, I have difficulties when we say, well, we have to think about the post-COVID era. That's also a futuristic issue, because unfortunately, we're not there yet. And we know that. So We continue to experience, the catastrophic effects of the COVID pandemic. The virus is touching every territory, every economy, every health system as we speak right now. So when I was thinking, what are we going to do with more than 40 million people infected and the numbers that are still growing with the COVID, and perhaps we need a little bit of a reality check on what we do, what we have to do in the current circumstances with increasing poverty, increasing inequalities, unemployment, the situation of women, not only because of the increase in domestic violence, but women that are, more, have been victims of mistreatment as in their full professional capacities. They're losing jobs quicker than men, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it's really saddening to continue to give some data and information because things are not going well. So as I said, I have difficulties thinking about the post-COVID era, and perhaps, what I'm going to do is provide some, elements for analysis and see how, in a very pragmatic way, we connect the local and regional governments to the global agenda, what spaces are available, how to do it, et cetera, because I think it is extremely important, especially now. And the other general comment I wanted to do, when my time is over, just say that's it, and then I will stop there to just have a conversation with everybody. But I think that the toughest challenge that we face is what I would call simultaneity challenge. Governments, societies, communities have to work like in two tracks at the same time to contain the pandemic, take informed decisions, short-term decisions, like almost on a daily basis, and at the same time, design and implement recovery plans, address the multiple consequences of the virus, from mental health to unemployment, from hunger to violence against women. There is also, in this simultaneity of action, it also happened at the scale level, meaning we have to act and decide at the community level, to the city level, to the country level, but also very important decisions are made at the multilateral international level. And I see that that's where local and regional governments come to play, and too well that local governments have felt greater pressure to deliver and provide services, health, education, food, shelter, due to the tensions, the shortages, the inabilities of some governments to deal with the pandemic. And we have seen success stories, but we have seen, profound failures as well. So, and we have to remember that, people, public opinion, voters, citizens are holding their governments, local and national, accountable every day, according to the performance regarding the COVID responses. And I think these are very important elements to take into account for this conversation. So, and I looked at the question.
Allow me then to ask you one question, Maria Fernanda, because you are identifying some of these areas where you think local governments can really make a difference, and it's part of the Citopia exercise that we will go back to Basu. Where can we make a difference, which is the community perspective. Needs to be the perspective that leads our world. You are also identifying some of the challenges. My question, a very concrete question to you, have you seen any evolution in the perception of member states or global stakeholders, like, of the multilateral system, around the role that cities need to play, local governments and communities? Have you seen, since the beginning of the pandemic, have you seen them shift in their ideas? Do you think they are starting to realize how critical it is, or you haven't seen that yet?
Well, I I think we have to think about a variable geometry here. I think there are cases that where governments have actually, return responsibilities to local governments because they have been, unable to respond with the swiftness, with the capacities to really address the needs of people on the ground. And I have seen cases, for example, in the crisis of the COVID in Guayaquil, in my own country, the government at some point said, the lockdowns and everything is in the hands of of mayors. You have to take the decisions. The problem was that, a national government is supposed to provide the information, is responsible to the national health systems, to the national procurement processes, et cetera, and there was a disconnect between the pressure over local governments and the actual capacities they have to deliver, from budgets to infrastructure, et cetera. So there has been, I think, greater consciousness that, local governments play a critical role. But the settings are not quite there yet. Sometimes policy, legally, resources.
The longer term frameworks and visions are not there. I think that local governments, we are very used to seeing the evolution of powers or dumping of powers and responsibilities when other spheres of governments do not know what to do, and that has also been in the climate discussion a very strong issue. But maybe the more structural approach is what we are missing. Yeah. Any last comment before I go to Basu for the next round?
Well, no, I wanted to say that I think that there is also a conceptual issue that is important. Having sat at the UN as a minister, as an ambassador, but also as a president, what I have seen is that some member states think that the issue of scales is incremental. That is incremental because it's from the local from the very local at the community to the local government to the national and then to the international. And I think it's extremely important that we understand that it doesn't work like that, because local governments, regional spaces need to have their own voice because they have particular agendas, particular perspectives, particular experiences. And there is a need, to jump a little bit that level, and connect the local governments, the regional governments directly with global decision making.
Exactly. And it's not a linear progress that we need to build in. It's not
exactly
a very important concept. Yeah.
Yes, and I think we need to work closely with member states that understand that. Yeah. And I remember, when we were organizing these high-level panels on everything, on key issues, on middle-income countries, on this and that, on inequalities, on tax and fiscal policy, etc. Mm-hmm. Basically, national governments already have the voice. Yes, they do have the voice, but there is a very particular, unique voice with self-identity, which are local and regional governments. And I think this is a concept where we need to work, strategically. And in the next rounds, perhaps I will come up with some elements.
A very important new concept that you're bringing in here about this non-linear progression, which also local governments will need to apply in their relation with communities, because we face the same problem.
Exactly.
Once that we get the seat, we think, oh, we represent, but it's not that kind of linear progress. I see Yolanda from HIC nodding. I know. But I think it's very important to conceptualize it. So back to Basu with Octavio's question, and colleagues. We have about half an hour left for this discussion. Start jumping in and getting ready to contribute to this one. Basu.
Yeah, so Octavio, I think you are absolutely correct. It has society has to be built on values. And the values that I was speaking about would be social values, of justice, freedom, human rights, respect for human rights, a sense of cooperation and community, and a sense of community responsibility. I don't think we build enough of that community responsibility. And what that means then is to change the social compact. So, even the nation state is a modern construct. A nation state never always existed, but it came about because of the changes in society. Now we are on the cusp of massive changes that are taking place in society. And the relative power of nation states versus the private sector and versus civil society is currently being challenged. And the reason for that is two things: the diffusion of capital across the world and the diffusion or democratization of information. The democratization of capital means that capital moves across borders, and so the private sector suddenly risen because, nation states get their revenue from the tax or base of a country, but private sector gets its revenue from the entire world. So it is somehow now the revenue of private companies are larger than the GDPs of countries. So this is the first thing. And then democratization of information. Today, just with a cell phone, people can mobilize millions of people. So they have now got the ability to mobilize through and monopolize information, and information is power today. So this thing is changing, and this means that society will change, and we need to look at it. And therefore, for me, I'm really passionate, as Emilia knows, about cities, because really that's where the future lies. And the quicker that nation states, and I know, Maria, you've been in the General Assembly, I've been there many times, and I see what happens in the General Assembly. But I think the quicker that nation states understand the important role that cities play, particularly also because, even sometimes our electorates are based on identity, and identity permeates down to a city level. So we have to take all of this into account. So I think, Ottavio, you are very right. It is about values. I once looked at a Swedish city in the south of Sweden that had the highest level of entrepreneurship in the world. And I asked the Swedish government why this was so, and they then said, look, we'll fund a trip for you to the city to spend 5 days. So I spent 5 days. And what I found was their level of entrepreneurship was so high because it was based on a value system that was underpinned, of course, firstly by religion, their own religion, but the fact also that the bosses saw the workers as co-workers, and that there was some kind of social compact that spurred this kind of social entrepreneurship and gave even the workers some level of ownership and responsibility over the companies. The trick is, how do we begin to inculcate these values across the world?
Yeah, and the issue of values is tricky. We at the global movement of municipalities have started to talk about values again after almost 2 decades without talking about them really. And our Durban Declaration was very strong on values and on principles like undeniable revisiting local democracy, generation equality. We are an equality-driven movement, and there is no question about this. So we started human rights. We started to put these kind of things as basis, which we had kind of, they have always been in our work plans. This is what we've been promoting, but it was a very difficult discussion to have. Now we see our members talk about this more. I was this morning in a meeting of our executive board in the Middle East and West Asia section. They were talking about values. I was in our BRICS forum a couple of days ago. They were talking also about values. We don't discuss values in the same way, and this is the tricky part. But I guess that will need to be part of the discussion. And in order to do that, we are approaching topics from a different perspective. Like, for instance, the meaning of culture in our societies. Cultures and values are very linked to each other. and approaching culture not as a commodity only, and from more a perspective of rights, which is what we are trying to promote with our Rome Charter, will play a very important role. The part of this discussion which I really like, that concerns me a little bit, is when we say cities are the future, what if cities governments make exactly the same mistakes that national governments have been making now? What if we are switching from a nation state notion, which is now obsolete, and you were describing it, Basu, to a mega city kind of perspective? How can we make sure that we don't do that? And I guess this is where Octavi was directing his question. Octavi, you want to?
No, absolutely. I fully agree. The issue of values, of course, is tricky. But what I see, even within my membership, like two trends right now, with this narrative of rethinking urban spaces, there is an approach that for me is risky, is that we approach this rethinking only in terms of urban design, in terms of planning, in terms of infrastructures, because this is the debate after the COVID virus, no? Digital gap, public space, mobility. But of course, for me, all these discussions need to be, you need first to have a discussion on values. But of course, it's not easy. As I agree with Emilia, and you need to link with culture and the different approaches. But otherwise, if we rethink the city without taking into account values, we are going to do the same mistakes that we did in the past. So that's what.
I call that, I describe that as technocratization of the notion of government. I mean, very often when other stakeholders, and in particular the multilateral system, acknowledges the important role that local governments play, they technocratize our role. They make it very technical. You need to protect the urban infrastructure. You need to promote, and I think we are stepping out of this. And I see that Luz from Bogota, Luz Amparo Medina from the city of Bogota has raised her hand. And I wanted you to bring, you have just gone through incredible 3 days with the Minga in your city, which was welcomed by the mayor, whether the president wanted to welcome the Minga or not, you were doing that. How was that, Luz? Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you, Emilia, and thank you, everybody. It was wonderful. It was an exercise of political and human rights. And this is an administration that is absolutely committed to the protection and the guarantee of human rights in the city. So it was a beautiful experience. And we learned a lot.
Explain what the Minga is, because, sorry, I didn't introduce that. So just 2 words, Luz, what the Minga is.
Minga is an indigenous way of being, of working, of socializing. So they organize the communities are organized in a social movement, if you want, and they have a very clear agenda to protect their lands, their territories, their culture, their cosmogony. So it's very rooted in our indigenous people. Colombia has more than 120 indigenous peoples. This accounts for something like 10% of our population. So they
visited Bogota. They came to Bogota.
Yes, and they organized from many countries, many parts of the country, especially the south, and they came up to Bogota, and they wanted to talk to the central government, which it didn't happen, but they had a voice. They made their points. There was a lot of suspicion of having problems or infiltration from violent groups, but it didn't happen. It was just a very pacific, very peaceful expression of democracy, and we are very proud and very happy with the result of the whole process. And the city facilitated their staying in the city by many different ways. So we granted them all the means, the accommodation, food, everything to make their voice being listened by the country. It was a very good democratic exercise. So I just wanted to point out, because I would have to leave very soon, and this is a very important space of co-creation, as you mentioned, Emilia, and thank you for facilitating it. I would like to pick up on something Vasu mentioned, the need of a new social, environmental, and perhaps intergenerational contract. We are in a very, very important period of humanity's history. It's not just about city governance and city growth. We are talking about climate crisis. We are facing a climate crisis. And we also face a very challenging time in which the youth are not being represented, or they feel they are not represented by us, by the people who are making the decisions right now. It seems like a shortcut in the way we communicate with the young generations, and they are inheriting this mess. So we need to find ways to make a new agreement, a new social contract in which women have a voice. We were talking about values. When we address values in a global scene, is very, very tricky and very dangerous, because there are differences there that might stop the conversation if we address it very frontally. I think a way of an alternative way to address this conversation might be in terms of caring, taking care of people. What should cities provide? Why should the governors do to provide care in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of opportunities for especially women and the youth at this period of time? And also empower citizens to address their own needs, to make them aware of their responsibility as individuals in the community, in the city, and in the global sphere. I think there are discussions where that can be structured about taking care of people. Even the new urban design and all these urban discussions are around the cities of proximity, these structural discussions, technical, also to take to incorporate the caring of the people, of the citizens, as the heart of the discussion. So this is what I wanted to say, this opportunity, and I really appreciate this space, Emilia. Thank you, Octavi, and see you very, very soon, I hope.
Well, thank you very much, Luz. I think slowly we are shaping this consensus that we do need a new pact, and that we shouldn't be waiting around to shape it around any international agreement. I think we have very good, ambitious frameworks, but I think we need to push for that discussion to happen and to create our own narrative. And some of the issues that have been shared today are extremely important. I think this Citopia concept of Vasu that we have picked up on, comparing it to the disruptive narrative that we look, and trying to counter some of the ongoing false narrative nowadays, will be extremely important for that pact. The second aspect which I would like to highlight is Maria Fernanda's very interesting concept of, look, progress is not linear, and the roles of the different actors are also not linear, and they don't need to be incremental in some cases. In Spanish, I always talk about teoría de conjuntos, which is circles that interact with each other at different moments. Is not a line, and sometimes they meet, and sometimes they don't. I think this concept will be, I think, very critical for this co-creation of the new paradigm, based around the values and the principles also that some of you have highlighted. And one very important thing that Luz has brought to the discussion is this notion of caring. You know, sometimes you have very good local, regional, national, and international leaders that do not have the means to provide everything they would need to provide to solve a problem. But they have the empathy, they have the understanding and the will to care, to protect, to support. And that notion of caring cities, I think, is extremely important. It's what we try to describe in our narrative in the Durban Congress with being sentinels of aspirations and dreams. You might not be able to give the best school, you might not be able to give the best roads, you might not be able to do all of that, but you are, as leader, very aware that, first of all, you need to co-create the solution with the community, and you need to care about the possibility of everybody. So yeah, very interesting inputs, I would say, Octavi, to go into this pact. I don't know whether Maria Fernanda and Basu, you would like to make final comments. I don't see any hands raised. And then after your comments, I would go to Octavi to have the second part of the meeting. Maria Fernanda.
Well, very, very quickly, I'm so inspired by what Luz Amparo Medina has shared with us. I had the morning mingas at the UN every, once a week, calling ambassadors to really speak out our minds, regardless of our country, on the critical issue. Minga, means collective work in Quechua, and we use it very much in all the Andean countries. But, I just wanted to bring something, to the conversation. We are presently, living a refounding moment for the international multilateral system. There is this very dynamic process of the UN 75 global dialogue. There is a very profound conversation on the new roles of the multilateral financial institutions. We are imagining and co-creating the agenda for women, women's rights, and the Generation Equality Forum for the next 20 years. And what I'm trying to say here is that, local governments, municipalities, you have to be present in that conversation of reshaping the international multilateral world. And there are very concrete issues that are happening. So number one, I think it's very important what Emilia and Octavia and all of you said. We need to remake the case, the narrative, and the numbers for local governments. It's extremely, it's a weapon that you have, because what you all know, the 70% number, I mean, everything, how to localize the delivery of the SDGs. Without local governments, the SDGs are simply not going to happen. And we know that. So the number one is the narrative and the numbers. The number two is the strategy. How is that you have to have a voice? It is, very necessary. What is the strategy? And I think the strategy is to seriously engage with member states in multilateral settings. There is a group of friends of the cities that need to be revived and revitalized.
Might be a new Minga, who knows?
Yes, but it has to be sustained and structured, because it's extremely important. And I know there are several countries that will be more than happy to do it. The global movement of municipalities have to be connected with the International Alliance on Multilateralism, with the Global Governance Forum, which is proposing 20 transformative actions for the international architecture and the retooling of the UN. I think we need to use this momentum, in the most creative, but also most active way to make it happen. To engage with the Interparliamentarian Union, which I know that you have very strong connections, and what are the tactics at the end of the day? I think that it's extremely important that you have an active participation on the review process of the VNRs. This must seem very technocratic, but it's not. The VNR is the voluntary national reports of the Sustainable Development Goals. The design is being, reframed. This design has to include, a seat for, the municipal movement at the table. In the design phase, not,
Yes.
To have a line or a chapter, etc., etc. The IPU, periodic review on human rights delivery of member states, it's being also reassessed. It's in a voluntary basis, but it is a thermometer. It is a water testing of human rights from countries. You have to have a seat there. So, and on the Bretton Woods institutions rethinking, and I'm part of some of these think tanks and conversations. The municipal movement has to have a voice and a seat as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we are living, you are speaking and everybody's speaking about the new social contract, the global Green New Deal in Europe, the building back better. There is no possibility of building back better without the majority of the people living in cities and mega cities worldwide. Mm-hmm. And it is, I would perhaps ask you, Emilia, to have a second chapter of this conversation just on strategy and tactics on
Yes.
how to do it. It's extremely, extremely important.
No, absolutely. There will be a second, a third, and a fourth chapter of this conversation. What we have been doing, and let us think that we have we have arrived to this point because we come from a process where, if I may, and I have been part of it, so it's self-critique. We might have been talking too much about tactics and places and posts. I think we are at the moment where many of our tactics have worked because we have spaces in many places that you have just mentioned, almost all of them actually. But what we are lacking maybe is a true unified vision towards the future. I mean, not a single vision, but a vision that is co-created with the communities, and one where we are not substituting the member states. We need to come with that change, with this new pact for people. You have described we are at a foundational moment, and I think this is absolutely right. So we are today starting to shape some of the key critical ideas around the narrative. Then we will need to talk about indeed the tactics. But I think it is very important that our pact for people, our future vision, really takes shapes and is not only constructed around government, but also communities. And from my perspective, this is one of our main challenges. But I promise you a second, a third, and a fourth chapter. We are just getting started. So, Basu, in UCLG, instead of the Minga concept, we use the Ubuntu concept. The Ubuntu concept is very similar to Minga, but the key change, the key difference for me is that Ubuntu brings something which is really relevant for the global movement, which is that you are only you when you consider yourself reflected in other people. How the others see you also determine what you are and what you can do. So you don't really exist without each other, basically. And I think that is very important for local governments in an international context. And it's also very important for our regional representation in the different continents around the world. You cannot deliver a good continental agenda, regional agenda, if you don't think about the global right now. So, Basu, any other thoughts that can enrich the context of this discussion by chapters, like Maria Fernanda is suggesting? You are muted, Basu, unmute.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Maria is right. You have to not just have a representation, but, it's also about lobbying and advocacy in these forums. Because that's really, at the end of the day, if you want to shape the agenda and if you want to shape the policy of these institutions, as we should be shaping them, then you have not just to be represented, but you have to figure out how to lobby and how to ensure you have strong advocacy. Let me just take 2 points, Emilia. I think the Ubuntu one is important because it talks about the value of interdependence as opposed to independence. And very often, if we talk about what Luz has said, the social compact, and she's correct, it's not just it's a social, environmental, and intergenerational compact. And if we look at people, planet, and government, people, planet, and government has to do with society, with also the environment and the interdependence of the different structures in society, but also our interdependence as society with the environment, and then the interdependence of the different generations also. So if we're looking at a social compact, in a sense, we have to be talking about this concept of interdependence. You can't talk about a new social compact if you don't in yourself internalize the concept of interdependence. It's only through internalizing the concept of interdependence that we will be able to talk about a social compact. And then let me say this issue on culture and values. I am going to be getting on an aeroplane now precisely to talk about that. We are going to Juba now for a 5-day discussion with the two sides on the issue of state and religion, and whether there should be a secular state or not a secular state. This goes down again to values. This goes down to culture, to values, etc. So it's very important discussion, and I hope that we will be, as you said, maybe at the city level, not having too many of those discussions. Maria will know, for example, SDG 16, Maria, was one of the most controversial SDGs to get passed, simply because it went to the core of our values about how we see, the issues of peace and security, violence, non-violence, etc. So again, I think it's a difficult discussion, but we have to have those discussions. Emilia, I thank you very much, Pablo, also for the arrangements. If you will excuse me, because I have to make travel arrangements to go now. So, if it was not COVID, it's a very simple case of grabbing your bags and leaving. But with COVID, it has become extremely complicated to travel. So thank you all very much. And I wish you luck in the rest of your deliberations. And definitely we will walk this journey with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Basu. All the best also to the people of South Sudan, and all the best for your mission. Thank you very much. Sofia Torres, you asked for the floor.
Yes. Hi,
Please.
Emilia. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the very stimulating conversation and ideas. And yeah, I would like also to touch on the topic of values, which I think, as Emilia was saying, will be a very long, enduring, and renewing conversation, but it's very important that we have it right now. And I agree with what Luz was saying of care emerging right now as a value more and more stronger. And I think that the moment we're living now, we also see that the public, the idea of what public is a value that is emerging and becoming more stronger, not only in the sense, and then of course, public services come to mind, but again, not in a technocratic way of how we deliver them in the best way possible, but also on how we manage these services and how we manage what is public in general. And this is a very interesting discussion to have, brings local governments to mind, because it's very interesting how now we talk about remunicipalization and not nationalization or undoing privatization, but municipalities and local governments become protagonists, but also brings multilateralism, because I was reviewing right now again the points of the Decalogue, and it's very interesting how we have public services as the first point, and then right after, the financial construction and the financial pact. And when these conversations that are already taking place, and they will be more in the future again, we have to think not only how to allow for the reconstruction, but the values that are behind this reconstruction. And the public as a value, I think, is something very interesting for us to work on. And just wanted
Yes.
to leave this
No,
reflection.
absolutely. Thank you very much, Sophia, from the Global Platform for the Right to the City, a very long-standing partner of UCLG and of our Committee on Social Inclusion and Human Rights. I think, yeah, the comments are becoming a new critical value that we say out loud. Also, if you look further down in the Decalogue, we also talk about caring for those that care for us, and that is quite a new concept for us. But I think it's absolutely critical to. I hadn't thought of the commons as a value. I had looked at them more as an approach, but I think it's a very interesting. It might be a good foundation for this new pact for people that we need to shape. Because sometimes it will not be about putting new things on the agenda, but looking at them from a different perspective, like we are proposing with the Rome Charter on Cultural Rights. I mean, if you change the prisma the lens that you are looking at things from, then a lot changes. So Octavi, I am going over to you to the second part of the discussions. Believe me, colleagues, I am in Zoom meetings every day, but it's very seldom that we have the kind of in-depth discussion that we are having today. So I really hope it will continue inspiring us in the coming days. So Octavi.
Thank you,
Por
Emilia.
ello.
No, it's amazing, because I have the feeling as well as you that today we're starting a kind of new conversation, maybe not new, but we're starting to bring together some different issues and topics and approaches that we're discussing a little bit in isolation. Something that started in Durban, but I think today it's coming everything together. And this debate previously, it brings us to this second part on how we can put into practice all these things, how we can start to move forward and concretize. And it's very interesting because, well, there's something that you said, Emilia. It's true that maybe the topics are not new, and we don't need to think about new topics. It's the way we work, the approaches, and as well to take into account the momentum that we have. That it looks like at all levels, everybody's questioning the structures. The system that we have now on board is not really adapted to the needs and the realities. And the other thing is the acceleration of processes. I was reading the other day, I don't know exactly the figures, they said that the fire took like centuries to move around the world, whilst the new technologies, mobile phone, in less than 30 years, was all around the world. So this is something new, and we need to cope with this dynamic. So I agree, it's not the topics, probably it's about the dynamics and the context and all these discussions that we had previously. So I think, as you know, and Emilia said, we had a previous meeting on these cities are listening to explore the need of having this space of cities are listening and how we work with communities and civil society organization. And there already we were identifying like 3 practical areas of action. And I think even it was not explicitly said in the previous session now, you already said something, Maria and Vanus as well. And this idea of we need to do sharing, we need to do transforming and acting, and we need to do influencing. And that means that sharing means that from the diverse perspectives, we need to come into common priorities. That will be one step. The second one that I call transforming and acting is this transforming policy recommendations into actionable strategies. And the third one is influencing. So how we develop a structural dialogue and we develop joint advocacy when we can have more impact. So, and in fact, I don't think these 3 areas of action, it's one after the other. They go hand by hand, they go in parallel, because each other strengthens the other one, but they need to go together hand by hand. And as well, if we work in these 3 action lines, I'm sure if we can support this idea that we need facts, we need figures, and we need the reality to also to support what we're doing. In this sense, we have asked different actors to provide some examples of already work that's being done that could fit in these 3 different areas of sharing, of transforming and influencing. The first one that I said before is from diversity perspectives into common priorities. It's a little bit what we already did in the life learning experiences, but moving forward and working together with communities. And for this, we have invited, let me get it right, Puvendra Akia, he's the IDP manager of the Etiweni municipality, and Patricia Mancuello, coordinator of the centralized cooperation of the city of Buenos Aires strategic plan, that they will talk us and explain us the experience in public space and mental health well-being. That could be an idea of how we could work this sharing of experiences. So Puvendra, I don't see you. Are you there? I cannot see you. Ah, yeah. Okay, yeah. Here,
we have a change. It's the CIB who's presenting.
Oh, sorry. Okay, then we move to the other experience. So we leave the sharing and we move to the other area, which is about transforming policy recommendations into actionable strategies. And you know, here CIB, the capacity institutional building, they have developed, been working with local governments in contributing to reach the objectives of the Decalogue of UCLG, and as well they can show some recommendations of actions. So we have Jessie Post, she's project manager of VNG International, and she will explain us about the impact of COVID-19 on the local government development cooperation network. So Jessie, whenever you want.
Thank you, Octavia, and also thank you for adapting the agenda and being flexible. I was afraid I would fall off the agenda because of another meeting.
No worries. And I think your intervention is very interesting because this idea, I mean, we've been discussing, we are very good at developing policies, and working together in policies. But then the next step on how you move from policy into actionable strategies, this is quite the challenge. So we're looking forward to hear your experience.
Great, thank you. Well, indeed, very interesting meeting. I'm really inspired, and I sound surprised, but indeed all these Zoom meetings have been rather, well, a lot of sending and not so much dialogue. So I'm really happily surprised that we have this conversation about how to move ahead. And I really like the 3 steps you mentioned, Octavie: sharing, transforming, and influencing, because I think they're all very action oriented. And after a lot of exchange on what is happening at the moment and how we need to move forward, I think many UCLG members now want to or need to move ahead. Many of us have had to reinvent the way we do things this year due to external shocks and threats. And the COVID-19 crisis has showcased weaknesses in our systems, some of which have been mentioned already. But it also really provides many opportunities to move forward and build back better, even though I agree strongly with Ms. Espinosa that it is difficult to already speak of a post-COVID-19 world while we are still in the midst of this crisis, also in the Netherlands, where I am located. I'm here today, indeed, on behalf of the Capacity and Institution Building Working Group. This is a working group of UCLG and a platform for professionals working at local government associations or at individual cities on development cooperation programs. So quite a niche. CIB is an active working group. We usually gather around 50 organizations who all aim to advance local government development cooperation around the world. And this year we even managed to gather 150 people at our online annual meeting. So meeting online also has advantages. And this meeting was entirely dedicated to the topic of the impact of COVID-19 on local government development cooperation, our sector. And I think it's safe to say that the COVID-19 crisis has really had a huge impact also on the developing world and on how we arrange development cooperation, together with many other partners ranging from humanitarian actors, national governments, and civil society organizations. Ahead of the meeting, which we had in June, we formulated key challenges to our sector, ranging from the need to transfer to more distant learning and technical assistance in development cooperation, to the need to enhance our efforts to include care and support for vulnerable groups, which have now been even hit even harder, including women and youth, indeed. And based on all these discussions on the challenges ahead and how we need to also innovate and well, adapt our approaches, we have written a joint position on the future for local government development cooperation, which is now ready for dissemination. So it's a document which, well, it's a policy document, Octavi, so it's also policy, but it's a document with recommendations to our own constituency, so to local governments working in development cooperation on how they can improve and innovate their work in the current context and beyond. But it also includes recommendations to national governments and the international donor community, because most of our programs are financed by national governments and international organizations, and we are dependent also on their priority setting and budgets to some extent. This joint position only becomes relevant and interesting if we can use it as a basis for discussion and dialogue with national governments and international organizations. A discussion and a dialogue on the future of development cooperation and why local governance needs to be, well, part of that, and maybe even more so than before. And I believe the Cities Are Listening events provide an excellent opportunity to frame this dialogue. So I look forward to seeing how we can indeed mobilize our contacts with ministries and international donors for this discussion, which will also really benefit our national advocacy work. I understand completely what you say when saying it's not linear, but to some extent in development cooperation, the national governments do stand in the center. All in all, we believe we could co-organize a very interesting event, and we look forward to learning more on how to proceed with you together.
Thank you, Jessie, and congratulations. Yeah, of course, it's a policy document. I've seen it, but I think the interesting approach of this, let's call it policy document, is that on the one hand, you link it with the decalogue of UCLG. So it's not launched in isolation. So it's linked to the issue of values that we were talking before. It also, of course, it sets policy recommendations, but also there are some concrete actions in order to implement these policies. And as well, you link it as well with not only addressing it to local governments, but as well, there are some things addressed to the multilateral level and the global arena. So I think it's quite a I don't know how to say, very holistic policy approach document. So, and I think this is something that we could not copy paste, but well, to look at when we're developing other policy documents. So, well, so thank you for sharing.
Great to hear, Octavi. And indeed, it also announces that CIB aims to then transform this also into concrete action plans, hopefully with national governments and international donors.
And it's important as well, because I have the feeling when we produce, especially from the networks, when we produce policy recommendations, then sometimes we lack on accompanying our membership in terms of implementing these policy recommendations, providing them with tools that they can then implement these policies. So thank you for your contribution. I don't know if you have any question to Jessie, otherwise we can move to the other action line. Or Emilia, do you want to add anything, or it's okay?
Well, I'm just very happy that our membership is daring to bring this to the table in a moment where everybody is talking about how we need to focus in things at home and how difficult the future is going to be. I think it is extremely critical for local governments to say development cooperation matters and decentralized cooperation is important and international cooperation is critical, and we shouldn't lose the sight of that. So I think it's bold, and I think it's very relevant for our movement, and I really welcome that happening within the framework of the Cities Are Listening. This is not a budgetary discussion. This is a much broader discussion about how we want to shape policy in the future. So I hope that everybody shares this feeling, and we will look forward to programming this into our calendar for cities are listening. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the most exciting thing is that we're saying, no, that local governments, especially with the pandemic, are the ones who were more engaged with citizens, sometimes developing areas of work that they shouldn't be developing. That was the responsibility of other layers of government. But at the same time, they're looking globally and calling for this international cooperation. So it's not about us or the others. It's about how we do everything together, no? And how they reinforce each thing. So we move to the other proposed action line that will be this moving from diverse perspective into common priorities. So this sharing on the basis of the experience that we had developed with the live learning experiences, and in fact, Tehueni and Buenos Aires, which are members of UCLG, which are part, and as well from Metropolis, which are part of the Commission of Urban Strategic Planning. They have a proposal in terms of starting a debate around public space and mental health. This was some of the issues that I think has been missing. We have discussed a little bit, but has been missing during the pandemic, no? The impact of mental health in citizens and the issue of public space and how public space and the use of public space have been developing or not being used, sorry, if I may say that in that way, because of the pandemic. So they are going to propose us how we can work and keep on debating and sharing on this thematic, and as well how we can as well produce some recommendations for the aftermath of the COVID. So Pamvedra, whenever you want, you can start, please.
Okay. Thank you, Octavia, Amelia, and all colleagues. I see I'm frozen on the screen, but I think my voice is fine.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
You can hear me. Great stuff. Together with our co-chair, Buenos Aires, we'd like to host a session that looks specifically at public open space, but with a specific look at mental health and physical well-being. And we all understand that, listen, public spaces are an instrument for urban transformation, and it's been key global debates over the last, let's just say, 8 to 9 years, in terms of how it's been incorporated into the new urban agenda, coming through in the SDGs, but also in terms of the other global agreements that we actually have. But it's taking a different look at how does open space play a transversal role in city development itself. So we be approaching this session as a sharing of experiences to assist our member cities in addressing the role that public space can play in improved mental health as well as physical well-being, which is a very important component of recovery and stress management within the COVID pandemic that we're currently experiencing. We also, through the session, looking at raising awareness of health and wellness in time of crisis. So whether it's post-COVID, whether it's pre-COVID or during COVID, or actually during other crisis events itself, how do cities actually get a handle on managing mental health and physical well-being itself? The session will also look at delving deeper into creating linkages between health and planning officials. Many cities or many countries, many local government organizations would often find that these two sectors actually don't sit together in the local government realm, or they actually sit at a national and provincial realm. So how do we actually build closer linkages between the two professions itself? This learning exchange actually comes at quite an opportune time, because if you look at the UN Habitat, they just recently released the Integrated Health into Urban and Territorial Planning Sourcebook. So it's a topic that is very current, both from an epidemic perspective, but also from a policy perspective. So if you're looking at the sharing, transforming, and influencing circles that we actually spoke about earlier, it is actually fits quite nicely in terms of how we actually want to move forward as UCLG itself. It's also to highlight the holistic planning and critical thinking that needs to be developed as to how we bring two sectors, be it health and planning together. So it's about bridging, but also the role that people can play in people-centered public space. Now, the UCLG is fortunate that we've got a very active leadership in terms of advocacy for public space, but it's adding a different slant and giving different importance to public space within the local government realm itself. So some of the partners that we're looking at, we've already engaged with at a conceptual level. We've already engaged with UN Habitat, who are very, very excited about the session. Looking at current public space experts, whether it's placemaking, 80 cities, or even the Bloomberg Associates, those are some of the possibilities for the provision of a keynote around public space. But we also want to cover a panel discussion. So you'd have an opening session which will create the sort of space for public space and well-being, but we want to have an interactive session that is almost in the form of a panel discussion. So Emilia, very much how you had the first hour where we actively engaged with speakers, that's the sort of session that we want to have with some of our city members itself. Where we cover Barcelona, Nairobi, La Paz, various metropolis representatives, UN Habitat memberships. We've currently put a list together, but we can actually discuss who actually becomes part of that panel discussion. But it's more interactive as opposed to a PowerPoint presentation around how we actually want to actually move within the city itself. But key for us is the possible questions. And what are some of the questions that we would want to put to a panel? Or what are some of the questions that cities want to engage on and listen to regarding health and well-being? One is, what is the current point of reference in terms of how do we see public space and how do we accommodate mental well-being and physical well-being in that public space? What are some of the good practices? What is the role that public spaces are playing in improving mental health and wellness in cities? We want to know is how are cities managing the sort of change in perceptions around safety? And now I'm talking about health safety in public spaces. How are they managing that? Because how do we continue to build confidence back in our citizens to return to public spaces? These are some of the critical questions that we need to ask, that we need to engage on, but also to actually develop some sort of ideas and a source book to advise our memberships and jointly advocate as local government as to what are some of the best practices itself. It's how do city practitioners incorporate physical and mental health-being into public design, public space design as well? How do the key elements of the health professions start to influence planning and design of public spaces? These are some of the key critical questions that we want to put forward to the panel and give us examples that we can actually take forward with our member cities itself. And just to conclude is we don't just want this session to be a session where we explain and talk and move forward. What we did realize is that when we developed the UCLG policy for, the public space policy framework, one of the key aspects on mental health and physical well-being was actually omitted from there. So we would use this session to actually update, review our current policy framework with the latest sort of information as well. So that is a full circle in terms of meeting, participating, developing policy, but also reviewing policy so that it can actually play a more meaningful role when cities actually use that framework itself. Colleagues, I thank you for your attention. I'm glad to take any questions or comments. I'll hand back to the chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Ponvedra. And I think that would be great if we start this action line with this discussion on public space and with the action of mental health. But as you said, we have discovered, many people, many citizens have discovered that public space was needed. I mean, they didn't realize the importance, even leaderships in cities, they didn't know the importance of public space in terms for people developing their life, for really fully develop, for leisure, for informal economy, for mobility, for, well, I think at the end of the day, public space is what structures our cities. I think for a while we had forgotten that, and now the COVID is confronting to this reality of how we can recuperate public space for the well-being of citizens. It's very important. And the approach, I mean, the methodology that you're proposing, it's really, really interesting because it's not about only presentations, but really a real dialogue and in exchange. And as well, that again, we see that this sharing has connections with the transforming and the policy and with influencing. No, and I think I don't know, Emilia, but these three different actions, whenever we are working on this common priority, developing common priorities, or the moving policy to strategies or influencing, that everybody should be thinking about the other areas of action. How you connect the sharing with the policy, and how you connect the sharing with the influencing, and the other ways around.
And I guess, Octavio, this is what we try to identify as something different in the dynamic of the cities are listening experience from the live learning experiences. The live learning experiences need to answer the needs of members to exchange the practices and to make them visible. And this is what we do. But this is a space where we want others to be involved. And the reason why we have invited these two cases, and you will hear about a third idea now, is to trigger the questions and curiosity from other parts of this smaller group, this close group that we have now, to contribute to those sessions. To me, this is exactly what we are doing, and actually is a very good summary of how we can approach future sessions. And we will give you a calendar at the end of the meeting about possibilities that we are playing with. But the idea of co-creation is exactly this one, and I really, really like these two links. And you have many hands up, Octavio, so I'm going to shut up. Let others talk.
Okay, let's see. I don't see who is asking for the.
I see Paula Bejarano from our local economic development and social
yes, see here.
committee.
Paula, Laura, and then Laura.
Exactly.
And Laura. Yes.
Exactly.
We start with Paula, then Paula. We cannot hear you.
That was Laura.
Otherwise, Laura Haley, sorry, because Paula is with the microphone off. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you so much. And just to firstly say, it's been such a pleasure to be invited to listen into this discussion and be part of such a rich and inspiring dialogue. And as UNICEF, as a UN agency, part of the multilateral system, we really recognize the role of local and regional governments in driving change, being closer to communities and the most vulnerable, and being the ones who are so often identifying innovative solutions to address the needs of the most vulnerable and the needs of communities, and that we really see it so critical to ensure local and regional governments really have a seat at the table within the multilateral dialogue at both at national level and at global level. And in recognition of this, we launched our partnership between UNICEF and UCLG at the Durban Congress last year. And I just wanted to sort of build on some of the discussions that have happened already around around creating the narrative around care and providing youth and the next generation a seat at the table. And to say from UNICEF's side, we see this as a really key opportunity to work closely with local and regional governments to help support and help shape this narrative and really stand ready to support you on this. And just in terms of sort of where we're working together with UCLG now, we've seen that, you know, COVID-19 has really shone a light on the most vulnerable, in particular, migrant and displaced children and youth. They're among the most at risk in terms of the public health impacts and socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic, but they're also the ones who most often fall through the gaps in the response and the recovery. And we've worked together with city partners to develop a resource package around inclusive response and recovery to COVID-19, which includes a specific training package around mental health and psychosocial support. And we're planning to support a peer-to-peer exchange with local governments around this topic and around this area of supporting the most vulnerable and the role of local governments and cities in addressing this with UNICEF's Child Friendly Cities initiative. And we'd be very interested to explore how we can use this platform and opportunity to really support UCLG and the Cities Are Listening initiative and help contribute to shape your Pact for People initiative as it moves forward. And we see this kind of peer-to-peer exchange as a really genuine step in translating the policy that we've developed together with city partners into concrete action, and to see how we can best support and work together with cities to build on great solutions that are already happening, and support further efforts to protect the most vulnerable. So just to sort of put that on the table, I would be very welcome. Any ideas, suggestions, feedback would be most welcome. And just to reiterate that from UNICEF's side, we really stand ready to support you in moving these conversations forward and really pushing for local and regional governments to have a seat at the table in discussions around issues that concern them and that they play such a big role in driving change. That's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Laura. I think, Emilia, it's great to hear one of our partners talking about co-creating narrative. That's really, really a step forward, I think. So, and Paola Bejarano, now.
Now I am.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm pleased to see you all and join this rich dialogue today. From the LID committee, we would like to make kind of a proposal of consultation strategy to contribute to the construction of a new economy within this new pact we've been talking about. We would like to set local economic development as the basis for economic recovery towards this new future, involving all partners, of course. And we're more than open to formats and inputs, of course. Yet it is important for us to promote economic recovery in all territories, placing the emphasis on gender equality and young people. And I subscribe to what Mrs. Espinosa said about the different forms of violence against women, and what the words from Mrs. Medina about young people. Also, and our Amelia said, mentioned the people pact. So we would like to foster a more gender and youth-based economic recovery with new ways of working and promoting the creation of political strategies along these lines. So from the lead committee, we consider fundamental at this time to rethink local economic development, and we feel listening is essential. Listening to cities, listening to communities, as been said, to our members, to leaders, and for sure using the spaces for collaboration and advocacy or influencing. Well, in this sense, we also count on the group of partners associated to the World Lead forum as an opportunity for articulation to achieve greater outreach. And well, we will invite them all as well to join us this consultation strategy within the framework of Cities Are Listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. Of course, I mean, economic recovery is going to be one of the critical issues. Well, it's already being a critical issue right now. So, and working with partners on that, I mean, that will be as well important, very, very important. Emilia, I don't know how we, for this action line, how we'll be kind of gathering in the coming, or afterwards in the coming days, the kind of topics that we want to tackle, or how
Yes,
we...
I wanted to share that at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
But very quickly, just to say that indeed, in order to make sure that this process is different from just a seminar where we explain things, what we propose is that we have a package of proposals that we present to each other. We create that space. So we present it to each other. We make sure that we make the connections. Sometimes we'd be a full group, sometimes not. But all of us need to kind of understand what we are trying to propose. Truly co-creation. But we'll go through that as we close the meeting. That is indeed the idea, Octavi, so that we avoid this, you know, this inertia that sometimes we have, which is normal, to just go with our own group, our own partners, our own vision.
Yeah, I think there are 2 points, and maybe that's for the wrap up in this action lines. One is the methodology, so that we don't do like the typical webinars or workshops, but it's something that has been something that promotes creativity and new ideas. And the other one is how we can incorporate new partners and not the usual suspects in the discussion. So I think that's the challenge we have ahead in this action line. I don't see any more hands raised, so we can pass to the third action line, which is more about the structural dialogue and joint advocacy. That's something that came as well from the previous discussion in Cities Are Listening, of how we wanted to approach it. This is not something new. I mean, it doesn't come from scratch. UCLG has already experience on working with partners and organizations in doing joint advocacy, and I think the most relevant one, I mean, and it's the one that was developed in terms of housing rights and the right to affordable housing, together with Habitat International Coalition. And they will share with us, if I don't get wrong, the names, sorry. We'll have Yolanda, who will be introducing us the work that was done together with UCLG on ensuring housing rights. So whenever you want, Yolanda.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you so much for having HIC part of the conversation.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that for those who don't know you, that I don't think anyone here don't know you, but just in case, you are the Secretary General of Habitat International Coalition. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be joining you. And I can only repeat, it's been an incredibly dynamic discussion so far. So thank you very much. I would like to extend apologies from HIC President Adriana Allen, who was going to join us, but due to unforeseen circumstances couldn't make it. But I would like to start off by just saying that HIC very much values the continuous conversation with UCLG from the Town Hall Congress encounters in 2019, and then continuing in the Cities Are Listening process. For today, HIC was asked to speak about the collaboration between civil society networks and local and regional government, not only in the present moment, but also looking forward into the future. And so, of course, for HIC members and civil society networks, the relationship with local and regional government is incredibly important, because struggles for habitat and human rights involve the direct engagement with local and regional governments. And so we very much commend the transition in which local and regional governments are really listening and engaging with civil society constituencies, not just on a once-off basis, but in a continuous manner. And one of these engagements was in a recent event that HIC co-organized together with UCLG, then the Development Planning Unit at UCL and the International Institute for Environment and Development, called Housing Rights, Looking Back, Looking Forward. That's the title of the slide that you saw. And in this housing rights event, it became clear, for example, that experiences of financialization, commodification, dispossession, evictions, and then diminishing support for community-led processes are most starkly experienced at the level of local and regional governments. And so, of course, this is particularly why local and regional governments are key partners and key actors for civil society networks. And the declaration on the right to the city that emerged from the town hall encounter is a very promising step in building this relationship, and particularly a relationship that emphasizes a rights-based approach and that defines conditions for local governments to create an enabling environment for civil society networks. As HIC, and also really broadly talking on behalf of or with fellow civil society networks, we looked particularly at the two questions that were posed and wanted to offer some thoughts in response to those. The first one is, what is missing to make communities the protagonists of global agendas? So we have three thoughts that we'd like to share with you. The first aspect is, or the first consideration around what is missing is a relational space for transnational networks of civil society like HIC, like Slum Dwellers International, like the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights, to regularly engage other transnational and global networks and structures. Because it is these spaces of engagement, and particularly the relational spaces, where global agendas are being shaped. Then the second point, which is linked to this, is what is missing is a clear understanding of which global agencies and structures are shaping and responsible for implementing global agendas. So who do you target, when, how, and why, and how do you engage? And then the third aspect is the ability of transnational agencies, so to not only bring global actors together, which is happening, but what is missing in our view is the ability to establish conditions that communities and perhaps even local governments can use to hold global actors accountable. So how do we move from convening and bringing actors together to establishing conditions that can hold accountable? So that's the first question that we considered. And then the second one is around what does the partnership between communities and local and regional governments bring to the global table, which we also found an interesting question. And there we have 3 points as well. The first one here is what a partnership like that can bring to the table is a question. And that question is how global dialogues and networks can expand the leverage of local community networks and perhaps even local governments. So that really speaks to the topic that was mentioned before about non-linearity, how are connections built that don't just progress in a linear fashion, and how can the global effect leverage at a local level, not just for community networks, but for local governments as well. Then the second aspect is that a partnership like this can bring the potential to safeguard the implementation of global agendas. What do we mean by this? That global agendas, when they are being implemented, actually are implemented in line with the struggle of civil society networks and in line with commitments that are made by local and regional government. There are many ways that you can implement the SDGs. They might not always be participatory, or they might not always actually speak to the priorities of communities on the ground. And then the third and final aspect, in fact, that is my third and final point. I just see on my notes, so I will conclude there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yolanda, and thank you because you were not focusing on the experience itself, in the contents of the experience, but in the learnings, which is what we needed right now. And I was thinking, while I was listening to you and all these different questions, is where we were some years ago when there was this mistrust between local governments and partners, and especially civil society organizations, and sometimes even competing in the global arena, and like thinking that our agendas were in opposition, whilst what you are all today you're explaining all the learnings, how much we can work together, how we can create this relational space. I mean, there is a lot of room for maneuver on how we can build trust and work together, as well as it doesn't mean that we need to build joint strategies for all the topics. That was something we had in the previous discussion the other day. But when we do it, how we can develop that, and you say which actors we want to target, how we can develop this space of building together this strategy, and as well the leverage. I mean, the leverage, how we can enhance each other's leverage in our actions. That I think that should be one of the critical questions we need to ask when we want to work together in a joint campaigning or joint advocacy. So what do you think, Emilia? You have the mic now.
Yes, I really like this reflection on there is one question that we had difficulty phrasing and bringing to the discussion. And it's exactly that one. What can the partnership between local government and communities bring to the table? Because usually the question that we are busy with and the questions that we discuss is how and who. How do we get to the table? Who gets to the table? And what we need to define now is what do we bring to the table? Knowing one thing that is no longer a question, but an assessment, and I am fully convinced about this. Coinciding with you, very much agreeing with you, Octavi, that we have seen an evolution in our partnership, which is very significant. I think right now we know that if we come together, we will reach the table. Only together we will reach the table. So we are so close to reaching the goal that I think it's very critical that we put the urgency in defining what we want to bring there. And this is a difficult thing that I have in my organization. People are more worried about how to get to that table, and we need to work on that. And like Maria Fernanda was saying, we don't work in a linear way. We need to do it all together, and it needs to interact. And sometimes you brought Star Wars, Octavi, before, but I am watching now Star Trek, and sometimes you get a push from a planet and then retract it. And okay, that's what we are busy with right now. And I think that the traction that we have now together is so significant that we need to rush into developing the message together. And we are at a moment where, like never before, there have been moments in history where we have been very together, but then we have driven apart. I think Habitat 2 might have been a moment where we were kind of coming together, then we drove apart, and now we're coming together again with very similar narrative. Like, for instance, this issue on safeguarding the global agendas, which is safeguarding the dreams and the aspirations, is that very thing. So I don't know. I think this puzzle is coming together very nicely. It will be difficult, and we will be missing some pieces. But I think overall, we will be able to have a broad picture, and it gives me hope for the work that we're trying to do, Octavi. I think it's actionable, but I think we are also progressing in our joint thinking.
Yeah, and I think it brings together safeguarding the global agendas and also the caring of our communities. I think that's the two things that bring us together. Well, I think that's the end of this part of the session with these 3 action lines. Looks quite exciting what we have in front of us and ahead. And I give the floor to you, the virtual floor to you, Emilia, for the wrapping
Well,
up.
I actually want to give it to Pablo to present the kind of calendar that we are proposing, and please, is in between brackets, and these are ideas so that you know what is coming, and in between bringing together some of these ideas, we will need to exchange among us to make this happen. But beyond the dates, what we would like you to focus on are the topics that you are bringing to the table. This is where we are. Pablo, over to you.
Thank you, Emilia, and thank you, colleagues. I would like to particularly say hello to our colleague Will from Xi'an on behalf of our co-president, the mayor of Xi'an, which is almost midnight in China. So Will, thank you, as always. Well, yes, as Emilia said, this is the proposed calendar. Almost all the sessions are to be confirmed. It's only to have a mapping of both the thematics and the different modalities of our Cities Are Listening experience. This would be, and I will go through what's different from one another. First, we will start by a member-led process from ALAS, the Association of, well, it's really difficult, the name in English, but it's from Latin America, and it's a workshop on how local and regional governments are reacting to COVID and their special place. We have Paola Arjona from ALAS here. This is a process that it's led by Mercociudades and by ALAS, which has the component of the Cities Are Listening. Then, as a reminder to all of you, we have our UCLG World Council in the week from the 11th to the 13th of November. And then we are suggesting to start with something that Laura from UNICEF was referring to. The dates are to be confirmed, but is going to the recovery for migrant and displaced children and youth, and the importance of having water and making also accessible for them to wash their hands. So this is a partnership with a UN agency that can go into the Cities Are Listening experience. Then during the Smart City Expo, we are suggesting to have a session dedicated to smart recovery. Emilia always says that we need to think about smart citizens, not only smart cities. So we need also smart recovery for these citizens. Then we can have the session that our colleague Puven from Etequini was presenting, and this will be an LLE as we know them. This will go directly to our Beyond the Outbreak strategy, and this is sharing experiences from the membership to the membership, and these experiences land in policy recommendations. So this will be a formal LLE. Then we can have the session the CIB was presenting, Jesse was presenting, that as Octavi was saying, this is the actionable part of the experience. And then as Paula was referring, we can have economic recovery. This is by 2020, but the idea is that this is all in the same process. And as Emilia was referring, in between, we can have these workshops and exchanges in order to construct the same narrative that lands to the final product that we have to decide what it is and where it ends. Emilia, this is the very first calendar that we are suggesting, and it's to be confirmed, but this is how we are looking by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I mean, what you see here is all areas that we have been in one way or the other exploring together, right? We've talked about them either in the previous one or in the previous meeting or in collaborations within the framework of the town halls. What I am encouraging you to do now is to let us think about new angles, new things that we need to bring to the table to add to this narrative that we are constructing together. My idea is that the topics that we identify as exchange experience, but then actionable in policy recommendations, etc., will also need to feed the discussion on our pact. And my proposal on the process for this Pact for People is that we schedule somewhere in December a next meeting of this group again, where we focus specifically on some of the aspects that we have discussed today. We have in-depth discussions for that, and in the meantime, the UCLG team will start building narrative around these things so that we can all start co-creating this new pact and this new deal. So they are parallel experiences. All of the things that we have presented today, all of them have already a policy dimension, have already the involvement of several partners, which for me is a little bit the criteria that will need to be met in order to be part of this Cities Are Listening experience. And of course, it is a free license for you to decide whether you want it to be more of a cities experiences exchange. So when I was listening to Puben about the thinking that some of the cities are doing around public space, this is perfectly fine, as long as we have had the possibility of discussing new aspects that we need to build in with members. That would be the more life learning experience as we have seen. It's all penciled. We are not. We are using a pencil. It's not oil painting. It can be scratched and it can be changed and it can be amended and we can rethink it. But I think it's very much our role, both from Octavi and myself, to push this group into a certain direction. I also see that the group is considerably big now, and we are going to try and keep it this way, not much bigger. But we might have other actors joining in as we see fit, and we invite you to think whether we have everybody that we need in this thing. And there might be moments where if we discuss certain aspects of this new pact, we will need to have new people at the table. But yeah, this is our proposal. So to be continue, a lot of work before us. Octavi, last thoughts from your side. And I am really excited to go with this to our World Council so that you know the Cities Are Listening experience is a document that has already been presented to our presidency. So we have the green light from the presidency, and I see Sian is nodding, he was there. It's also part of our documents for the council. And the notion of the Pact for People is already included in the first thoughts that we are developing for our renewed strategy as from 2022. So, you know, we need time, we do things with time. And so we consider this discussion with you to be shaping the future of the agenda of the municipal movement. So for us, this is very serious. Our World Council will be a week long. The two main sessions are going to be around equality and around recovery, but there are very few topics that we are not going to be touching. I mean, from finances to migration, to gender equality, ecological transition, and many, many others. Should you want to join, please write to us, because we are an open organization and we will be happy to welcome you. So now, Octavi, sorry, I just wanted to let everybody know that our council is open for everyone.
No worries at all. I think, as has been said, there, for me, in this cities are listening. There are two levels. The one will be the more, let's say, strategical and political, which is this work on this social pact, this new social pact, with things in terms of international dialogue, in terms of caring cities, in terms of ensuring as well the global agendas. And the other one will be more the practical side. This work that we could do in whatever work we do in these cities are listening with our partners should have these three axes: sharing, transforming, and influencing, but putting the accent depending if we want to put more on the sharing or maybe more on the transforming, on the influencing, but always keeping in mind these three spheres if we really want to deliver and have impact. So I think it's quite challenging and exciting what we have ahead. Not easy, but I think but I have the feeling that there is a good momentum, and I'll be very honest with all of you. Emilia knows that when in Durban she started with the town hall and all these things, I said to her, I don't know where you want to get, and I didn't feel like we were complicating our lives, and now I see it really clear that is the way to go, and how we can work with communities. I mean, especially with the pandemic, it's forcing us to really work with the communities in a closer way, and as well with the partners. And it doesn't mean that we need to join all our agendas. It means that we join forces when we can better deliver. So thank you.
We still did complicate our lives, Octavi, but complication is good. Simplicity is not always good. Complexity has its charms. So thank you very much, also Octavi, for your inputs, also to your team for the co-creation efforts. I see many friends in the screen. Colleagues, keep well, keep healthy and creative. See you soon. Thank you for being there. Cuídense mucho, gracias a los intérpretes y perdón por hablar todo el tiempo inglés. Un desastre. En la próxima mejor.
Will, my friend.